Question 3a is an explain question, and in philosophy that means you need to give a view and justify it. So you need to justify it by giving some reasons why it's true. So the question is to symbolize this statement. It is not true that if God exists, then he fulfills everyone's prayers. So the most obvious symbolization is this, the negation of G arrow F. But the problem is that this entails G. So you can prove by truth tables or another method that whenever the statement is true, G is also true. And that is a problem because many people would affirm this statement who would not affirm G, that God exists. So that's why we have to search for alternative symbolizations. So some of the things that I'll talk about some of the things that you might have used in your reasoning in your answers. So the first alternative is G arrow negation of F. So I'll note here that this is definitely not how we do the negation of an arrow in this course. The rule is not that you negate the consequent. The rule is that you negate the whole thing. And yeah, so this is definitely not following the rules that we're using in this course in truth functional logic for the negation of a conditional. But in this question, we're testing the rules a bit and seeing if they work. So we can actually note that it's actually quite a natural way of negating a conditional. For example, I might say, if I were the Prime Minister, life would be perfect. And so for you to deny that, you'd probably say, no, if you were the Prime Minister, life wouldn't be perfect. So you would probably negate the second half of it. So it's quite a natural way of negating a conditional. But some problems with this is that it's actually maybe too strong. Like maybe we don't actually want to say if G, then not if. Maybe we want to say if G, then not necessarily if. So something a bit weaker might be actually the meaning of this statement. And another reason that we have to know is that we are actually changing the conditional. Like I mentioned before, this is not the rule for how to negate a conditional. So we have to say we are departing from our usual truth functional logic here. We are sort of creating a new conditional or a new type of logic, which is, something that philosophers have done quite a lot with making different types of conditionals. Another option might be this one, the negation of G and F. And this is actually equivalent to number one, so it's going to have some of the same pros and cons. But we might also note that it's not really directional, like it sort of loses that G arrow F because it's just a conjunction, and that seems much more easy to switch around. And so that might lead to some consequences that you don't want. That could be a line of argument. I will also mention the possibility of not if as a possibility here. And here it's a bit similar to number two, but we're losing some information. There's no mention of G, of the existence of God in this one, which seems to be quite a key part of the original statement. But maybe you could argue that that losing this information is actually acceptable because in the first place, the negation of F is all we really wanted to communicate. And maybe the rest of it is just background, or you could take a line of argument that way. And then a third option is G does not entail F. And so this sort of captures that G doesn't make F true, that we don't have that if G, then necessarily F. It's actually the case that if G, it's not necessarily F. G does not entail F. So another way of stating G does not entail F is to say that G arrow F is not a tautology. And that means G arrow F is not always true. And this is quite different to saying G arrow F is not true, which is what the original symbolization was. And that's quite an important difference. However, this is not really a special relationship. Actually, this relationship of G not entailing F actually holds for any two different single letters. Like G doesn't logically entail A or Q either. So we might actually mean rather a different kind of entailment, which captures sort of the special relationship that we want to capture between G and F. Like we might actually mean that maybe G doesn't theologically entail F, or maybe we mean that G doesn't metaphysically entail F, rather than truth functional logically entail F. Um, so that again would be departing from the logic that we have. So I'll note now that you might think that all this trouble came because F sort of includes G. It includes that saying God fulfills everyone's prayers, sort of assumes that God exists. And so one way you might want to fix that, and you might think this fixes all the problems, is by changing F to everyone's prayers are fulfilled. Um, so that would solve, it may solve some problems, but you'll actually find that the issues that we've discussed still remain. So the actual core problem in this question is about conditionals and how to negate conditionals, really.